Hello, and welcome back, everyone, after a bit of a break to Something Rotten, a podcast no longer about rotten video games, at least not this season, but about the written word, Blake. Text. Books, you might call them.
Oh, thank God, no more fucking video games. Ever since Ryan Cohen descended from his ivory tower to slash my wages, I have said, stop, games. That's kind of a little bit of a would that be a pun? I'm not sure that would be a pun.
Yeah, something like that.
I'm done with you games.
Yeah, now you simply write books about them. Something that's not about games at all.
And look, once these are wrapped up, we're not doing any more of that. Yeah, by God, it's finally the book season. I finished reading this section at like 11:45 p.m. last night on a train with people watching the loudest shit I've ever heard on their phone. That's probably not an issue you deal with, huh? It's like...
No, not... I don't... Look, the great city of Durham, North Carolina does not have a beautiful public transportation system. And I know New York doesn't either, but at least there is one.
That's not quite what I was talking about. The speaker, the phone speakers.
No, I know. So because of that, I rarely encounter situations where someone is sitting next to me watching something at full volume.
Man, okay. Like, I've been kind of working. I've been trying to do some self-work, get right with God, you might say. Be a little less angry, a little less flippant, a little less dismissive, a little less talking shit. I have this like fear. Okay, Something Rotten is not like a particularly highly listened show, but we have a notable fan base, and a lot of them are in New York. And I now have this new fear that like someone will see me and be like, I think that's Blake from Something Rotten. They'll hear me still like talking shit, and they'll be like, what a fucking dickhead.
They'd be like, I've listened to that whole podcast and he's never talked shit once, and now I see him in public.
Yeah, here's the thing, folks. This is all there is. This is what you get. Anyway, I've been trying really hard to be like nicer and better. But the second I get on a train and someone's like watching fucking YouTube shorts on their phone, like I feel I have to like physically stop my foot from kicking their phone out of their hand. Like I can feel the muscles, like the muscles kind of twitch. Anyway, that's how I finished reading the most heinous section of this book last night.
I mean, it feels weirdly fitting that you would feel your body being contorted by anger.
Yeah.
Blake, the last episode of this show we recorded, you were in Japan. And then the episodes before that we recorded before you spent like a month and a half there. Now that you're back, can you give us like a, I don't know, quick summary? Yeah,
man, it was super sick. I can't talk about a lot of things I did. Well, I can talk about the things people know I was over there doing. I can talk about a couple things. I did the grasshopper thing. That was awesome. That was really fun. I think people will be...
And remind us, what's the grasshopper thing, in case we've forgotten over this long break?
The Lost in Cult, where I work, we're doing a job. We're doing a book on Grasshopper. It's like an art book that celebrates their, 20, 30 years or whatever, 25 years.
Killer 7, No More Heroes, The Silver Case, Killer is Dead.
No, well, not Killer.
Maybe not.
So that was really great. I think people will be kind of shocked at the people beyond Suda we have in that book. There were times when I walked into a room and was shocked at who was sitting across from me. I was like, what the fuck are you doing here? So that's really cool. If you follow me on Blue Sky, you might have seen I posted a picture with a particular director we've talked about numerous times on the show. Jacob, I know you don't know what I'm talking about because I blocked you on Blue Sky.
Yeah, of course I have not seen that because you blocked me a year ago on Blue Sky.
Yeah. You might have noticed I posted a picture of me standing with one Shinya Tsukamoto. Can't say anything more about that, but I felt I could share that photo. So, yeah, did a lot of work stuff, other stuff I can't talk about, but hung out with some of the homies, saw John Johannes, saw Fukui Shojin, the big homie, Then
Tell
Sam,
people why these people are big.
John
homies.
Johannes. I don't know. He's a friend of the show.
Yes, I know who he is. I didn't know either of the other two names that you said.
We've talked about Fukui on here. He's the guy that runs the bar that made the movies I love.
That's right.
Yeah. You don't know who Shinya Tsukamoto is, which is a failure of you as a movie watcher.
Blake, I am here as a person who's representing the listener who may not have every Japanese artisan you've ever listed in their head all at once.
Yeah, but do they have Google?
That's right. Hey,
I'm not ruining the show's pacing.
Go to fucking Google.
Yeah, go to Google, you fucking lazy asses.
Don't ruin the show's pacing. Just say 5 names with no explanation.
Anyway, here's a name that needs no introduction. Then Sam came, and we spent 10 days together, and that was really great because Sam and me have, I would say, a lot of similar interests and a lot of similar disinterests. So it's her first time in Japan. First time, like, she hasn't spent a ton of time outside of New York. You know, she's kind of a dyed-in-the-wool New Yorker in that way. But she, like, wasn't interested in doing, like, you know, the Travel Channel 10 things you gotta do in Japan or whatever. So, like, we didn't even go to the Shibuya Scramble or whatever, the big crosswalk. Like, she never saw it. And instead, like, we just found cool, grimy little things that we love, you know? We ended up in a lot of, like, crazy places that I don't think they were expecting white people to end up in. We went to Osaka and hung out in Shinsekai, which is it's kind of touristy, but it's also pretty seedy in its own special and unique ways. So it was great.
Blake, you described to me walking into a bookshop and having someone give you like a comical double take. Like, of like, welcome to the store. Wait, what the fuck?
I forgot about that. Okay, so like, here's a secret I would tell anyone who is going to Japan and wants to find like cool stores is learn how to Google in Japanese. Just learn like how to type a few keywords of things you're looking for and then put the Japanese into Google Translate, or not into Google Translate, into Google Maps, and then you'll get the results that don't have Japanese names, right? So anyway, I was working on a work project, and basically I just needed to scour every movie store in Tokyo. Like, I went to dozens of them, some really insane places. I've shared a few photos online of them, I think. But one was like kind of close to the outskirts of Tokyo. It wasn't super hard to get to, but it was not anywhere you would ever go. Like, if you didn't live there. Like, it was not super crowded. Like, it was pretty like suburban, but also like a lot of kind of like it seemed like public housing type shit going on. Like, you know, just not somewhere you're going to eat Ichiran ramen. So I go out there. It was a beautiful neighborhood. I really enjoyed it. And I walked to this bookstore, this old mom and pop bookstore, which there are tons of these everywhere, just like run by kind of an older couple. And I walked in, and as the lady is like looking up to say "Irashaimase," which is like, you know, hey, what's up, welcome, she's like halfway through a word and she sees it's a white guy and she goes, what? She's like, what? Like, visibly at me, like, how did you end up here? And I was like, hey, what's up? And I bought several things at the store. The guy helped me out. He could see. I was like, they have like these binders of things. They had like a bunch of binders, and I was going through them, and the guy like literally brought over a desk across the store for me and like let me set it down. I was like, that's service, that's quality. But I'll never forget that lady's face of just being like, what are you doing in here? And I knew what I was doing because I walked out with numerous things. Shouts out to them. Thank you very much.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I spent a month there. It was crazy. What have you done?
Well, I got engaged. That's something.
Engaged in what, like battle online? Like engaged in the discourse?
Yeah, like engaged in some fucker on Blue Sky. No, engaged to my now fiance Annie.
Oh my God, married to the game said yes, I do. That's so. I didn't know this is the thing. This is a surprise to me.
Yeah, you're shocked because you blocked me on Blue Sky, so you don't see my updates anymore.
How'd that go? Did
went
she say
well.
yes?
I mean, she knew it was coming, but
So she said yes?
She did say yes.
Okay,
actually, I don't think I even actually said, "Will you marry me?" I like got down on one knee, and she was like, "Yes." And so, technically, maybe I've kind of got a loophole if things go south. That's all I'm saying.
So when's the wedding?
Blake, you'll look. I don't want to broadcast that online, but we're inviting very few people.
Yeah,
but you're on that guest list.
that's true.
So
I'm
get
going.
ready.
I gotta hop a plane.
That's about it. Honestly, there's not that much going on in my life.
Yeah, signed all the book plates, and I'm sure a lot of listeners bought your book. Signed their.
That I haven't signed all of them yet, but I've signed like 400 of them.
Wow! And how many do you have to sign? Do a flex.
1,000.
Wow. Okay. Did we limit that number?
Yes.
That makes sense.
It sold out real quick.
Sure.
But you can still get the book, everyone. And then if you come to, I don't know, some sort of future Something Rotten meetup, I'll sign it. Doesn't need to have a book plate in it.
You think we would ever do that? I feel like New York is the only place we could feasibly
it's
do
like
it.
one time I could like come to New York and then we would say like, hey, we're gonna be at this restaurant.
I think it's the only city that like we could do it in.
Wait, you don't think Louisville could have a Something Rotten meetup?
I mean, okay, so like I know for sure, like hopefully this isn't a surprise to anyone. When you buy our merch, I see your address. That's just how that works. Like, so I see like when people are like from in or around my hometown, I'm like, oh fuck yeah, dude, cool. But then you like, I also live in Queens, so when I see people with Queens in their address, I'm like, that's right. You want to talk about books?
Yeah, well, okay. Here's the transition that I was gonna do before you so nicely ask about my life. Interesting thing that I learned about this author is that despite being relatively acclaimed, a lot of his books have not been translated.
That's right. That's true.
We are talking about, of course, the book In the Miso Soup by the acclaimed Ryu Murakami. And also, before we even start talking about this book, Blake, let's just drop a fat content warning for any number of things. Sexual violence, violence against sex workers, any other kind of sexual assault, rape, trigger that you might have. This is a gnarly book. And so I think we'll talk about his career and whatever more before getting into the specifics, but like if you have any kind of sensitivity around this stuff, go in with eyes open because good fucking lord.
Yeah, it's a wild one. Were you really familiar with Ryu Murakami before you jumped in here?
No, I may have read like he's had like a short story published in the New Yorker that I might have read, but none of his novels I had read.
You're definitely more like cursorily aware of him than you may think, because several of his books have been turned into movies both in Japan and in America.
I mean, a movie that you bring up constantly, Love and Pop.
Love and Pop, of course. Hideaki Anno's best film, if you ask me. Sorry, weebs. Audition. I mean, like, don't think it's a stretch to say one of the best horror movies ever made. Audition is based on one of his novels. Tokyo Decadence. Piercing, an American production, which is either the prequel or sequel to Miso Soup. I can't quite remember. And then like 1969 had a movie. God, there's tons of them. Tokyo Decadence, actually, he directed. So he's actually adapted some of his own works.
I was reading, I mean, just on his like Wikipedia page, his like non-writing career is pretty interesting. He was in a band. He made indie films. He went to school for like sculpture. He has a label. Like he seems like a man about town. He's doing all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, well, his novel 1969 is like a fictionalized comedic kind of autobiography of his like adolescence. That's super worth reading, about like him entering a film festival and kind of being a little dickhead. It's really cool. I love him. I've read, I think, 5 of his books. and seen numerous adaptations and movies he directed. He's a frustrating person to be a fan of because he shares a family name with probably the most popular Japanese novelist in America. So it's like really annoying. No disrespect to Haruki Murakami. I've just never read any of his stuff. And now, kind of out of spite, I'm not, because I go into bookstores and I'll be like, oh, they got some Murakami, and then it's always Haruki. And it's always like, fuck. But yeah, he's really great, and I came to him by way of loving Audition because Takashi Miike is my favorite director, and obviously that movie, speaks for itself. And I was like, well, I guess I'll read this book, and then fell in love with his writing because he really he has a very specific voice. Granted, we're reading a translated version, but he just writes with such a awesome kind of almost brevity. He's very to the point. His books fly by.
It is not flowery writing.
Exactly.
It's short sentences just saying kind of the thing, but not for lack of talent.
Yeah. And as gruesome as his books are, it doesn't feel like shock value, because I think the substance of those books and what he is trying to say is often very thoughtful and eloquent, if profound at times. I find in the Miso Soup a very interesting book as an intellectual exercise of a Japanese man trying to understand the similarities and contrasts of his country and America.
Yeah. So do you have the book in front of you?
Give me 2 seconds and I'll go grab it.
Just so the listeners know, we'll have written this in the description, but this book is divided into 3 days, and we are reading the first 2 days. So it's a little more than halfway, but it's a fairly short book. So it's in my edition, it's the first 145 pages or so. Blake, I wanted you to grab your book because you have much better Japanese pronunciation than I do. Can you read just the first paragraph? Because it's such an interesting way to start a book, and specifically a book that has been translated from Japanese into English. Immediately, I was like, oh, wow, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, it's kind of hard because I'm not used to the what's it called, Romanji version, which is the
it's transliterated.
Yeah. My name is Kinji. As I pronounce these words in English, I wondered why we have so many ways of saying the same thing in Japanese. Hard-boiled. Ore no wa Kinji da. Polite. Watashi wa Kinji to moshimasu. Casual. Boku wa Kinji. Gay. Atashi Kinji te I'm not really familiar with this one. Atashi Kinji te iyo no yo. Sorry to any Japanese or Japanese-speaking listeners that heard that.
Yeah, but it's immediately the book starts off, me reading it in English, of him being it's easier for me to introduce myself in English because Japanese is so complicated. And then the next paragraph is the kind of antagonist of the book, Frank, being hey, so you're Kenji. And it's just kind of as easy as that. And so I immediately was just very, the book tells you off the bat, this is going to be about language, and it is going to be about thinking about cultural differences, basically. That the very first lines are Japanese is different from English. It's weird.
Yeah. And they've said it in such an area that gamers are familiar with Kabukicho and that it's Kamurocho, right? From
that's literally the only shit that I know about any of this is I have played it in Yakuza,
sure.
So I kind of know what a cabaret club is.
Yeah, so they've said it in for anyone who doesn't know, Kabukicho, if you go to Japan now, everyone goes to Kabukicho because it's such a big tourist destination now. It was not 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You probably would have got your white ass fucking beat to hell or just robbed, probably. It is if it's not still, it was at the time, the largest red light district in Asia, and kind of the HQ of a lot of the Tokyo Yakuza syndicates. So it was just like the Yakuza neighborhood, a lot of sex crime, a lot of sex trafficking, a lot of sex work, a lot of, gambling, cabaret, drugs, blah, 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 blah. It's a red light district. So it's like, it's a neighborhood very central to Tokyo and the history of Tokyo, but it's also one that goes against what you might imagine Japan or Tokyo wants to outwardly present itself as, which is this very, put together.
It's like the American perception of Japan, right? Which is like very clean, very polite.
Exactly. And so setting this book here and exploring those differences and similarities is like very pointed, right? Like to put it in an area that is not like what you would typically imagine a Japanese city to be like.
Yeah, and I mean on our Something Rotten bingo cards, like within the first 50 pages, one of the characters, Frank, is like, hey, this reminds me of old New York. Like the thing that we talk about all the time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, okay, let's set up kind of just our main character and what's going on here. So the book's narrator is a guy named Kenji, who's young. He's 20, right? He's 20, and he works as basically a tour guide for sex tourists coming to Kamurocho. So it's like he kind of gets Americans, shows them around, will be like, if you want to just go to a club and like get drinks with pretty women, you can do that. If you want to go somewhere and get a hand job or, like fully, fuck someone, he will also help you do that. And he's kind of enmeshed in the sex economy in that, like, people know who he is and he knows certain clubs and he has, like, places that he brings people and he knows, the various workers.
Right.
And it's just like, this is his gig. He brings people around.
And worth pointing out that his job is needed because after this book came out in the late 90s, so it's kind of, in the middle of the AIDS epidemic, his job is needed because after the AIDS blow up of the 90s, 80s, 90s, you get what I'm saying? A lot of these clubs stopped allowing foreigners in because despite how the book points out, Japanese people also get AIDS. So he like works as kind of a buffer to be like, oh, well, he's with a Japanese person. So that is his job.
Yeah. And his feelings about like the sex industry in general are kind of a weird thing to work through, where he certainly like, he doesn't, it's not like he thinks that the whole thing is immoral, but it definitely seems like he does not have respect for a lot of the people who do it. There's a line later on where he talks about like working in this industry for men basically just like saps your morality. And so you can like see, he's like, when you look at these guys who have been here for long, you just see that they don't have any soul left because that's what you trade to exploit women for your job. So it's like he really kind of is like keeping a distance where he's like, well, I'm not like them, even though I am like literally participating in this economy. I'm this guy, and all those guys are, ugh.
That's kind of like him as a character, like keeping a distance while not always realizing he's participatory in these. A lot of times it comes out in like biases, but also, in this case, industry.
Yeah, and there's stuff that like, it's the kind of working through of like, he is our narrator. He's obviously not, he's not like a perfect reflection of what Murakami thinks at all. But there are things where I'm kind of like, are we supposed to think about this or not? For instance, like primarily, he's dating a high schooler, which is talked about a lot. He's dating a 16-year-old. He is 20, so it's not, like an enormous age difference, but he is very pointedly not in high school, and it is brought up many times that she is in high school,
and he doesn't always understand her because of that age.
Yes, and so it's kind of like, it is, it's a weird thing where I'm like, I don't know. Are we supposed to be uncomfortable with that? I feel like the age gap is slight enough that my guess is it's just they're supposed to be culturally different, but I don't think we're supposed to like morally judge him for it.
It's hard to know because the book also has a section about compensated dating, which is like which is kind of like a, I don't know, maybe it exists in America, but it's basically like older men who pay high school girls to go on dates with them and talk to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically it's sexless sugar daddying, which is certainly something that exists, but it is made clear it's like it's with high schoolers.
Yes 100%. This is actually what Love and Pop is about. He's drawing a line almost to be like, well, I'm not like them, but then there's that age gap, right? Like you see the ways he judges some people without always having the mirror turned in.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of that in this book of people drawing lines, because we talk to a variety of different sex workers who do all kind of like different levels of things. And so like, you know, his girlfriend is very clear that she's not selling sex, you know, she's just doing compensated dating. And then we meet other people at, you know, basically like karaoke bars or whatever, where it's like they're not selling sex, they are just selling the ability to like be near them. And then they're like, you know, kind of peep show hand jobs, but that's not totally. And so it's like it does seem like everyone is kind of defining like, well, I'm this, but I'm not that, in terms of like the level of sex work that they're doing, which is just like an interesting thing to think about. And throughout the chapters that we read, Frank seems kind of increasingly frustrated with it, where he's like sitting at a bar with women that he's paying to sit next to him, and he's like, so when are we gonna fuck?
Right,
you know, because
like...
he's doesn't understand or doesn't care about those distinctions that they've put up between like I'm this thing but I'm not that thing.
Well, I think also, especially at that time, like sex work in America was probably a lot more cut and dry, right?
Yeah. I mean, well, I don't know. I actually have no idea what sex work was like.
Well, we could also like maybe assume that a character like Frank would be more familiar with a cut and dry type of prostitution.
I mean, there's certainly, I don't know what the equivalent of like a cabaret club is in the US. Yeah. And honestly, it's like playing the Yakuza games, which is my biggest cultural insight into those, but they are often like about sex work in some ways. It is weird to learn about all the different things of like, you know, this is a club, this is a soap land, this is a whatever. They all kind of represent different things.
Well, like the Japan love and sex industries, which are kind of two different things, right? Has like a level of specificity that just like America has never had, right? Like we'll talk about this more on the bonus episode when we talk about like the specific sex clubs of the 80s. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you can imagine American being frustrated by it, you know, in Frank's fucking disgusting way. But it's like that a weird cultural divide you would never think about. It's like how we perceive sex work and the transaction of sex work, right?
Because like, there is certainly, like, there is sex work in the U.S. where people are paying and not just going to a hotel room and fucking, but it's not kind of like institutionalized in the same, like it's not acknowledged that people are kind of just paying for companionship or whatever.
Right, which speaks to like the cultural, and look, listeners, I am so sorry that we're just going to be two white guys talking about Japan on this. We're going to do our best to not be
two non-sex workers talking about sex work.
But like, you know, this is like kind of a widely known thing that like Japan has like people seek out compensated dating because they don't have a romantic life themselves, which has to do with a lot of issues of like labor and overwork and just like, you know, the birth rate is way down over there, blah 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 blah, and that's just like not as prevalent of an issue in America. Like that's a cultural divide that would have a trickle down to sex work, you know. It's like what people come to it for.
It definitely is an issue in America, but we're not dealing with it in the same way.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. But you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. And actually this is kind of getting into the book, but like while we're talking about this, one of the most interesting parts of it is, so before the books like starts happening, we learned that recently there has been found a high school girl like literally chopped up and left in a trash can somewhere. Like there's been a recent murder of someone who was doing compensated dating and was horribly murdered and, you know, left somewhere. And so there is this kind of panic going on in the news, and there's a part where Kenji's watching TV and someone says like, look, we need to clamp down on sex work. We need to clamp down on compensated dating, because if we don't, we're going to end up like America. And Kenji kind of thinks like, they don't have sex work over there. Like, what are you talking about? What is like ending up like America mean? Because it's like, he's like, we're actually doing way more of this stuff than they do over there, but America's used as this kind of example of like the lawless land that we don't want to end up like.
I think the book misses this because it's just like, I don't think Murakami has lived in America to know that this is a thing, but I often think of that tweet that's like Americans seeing a very specific American thing that only happens in America, and they say, what are we, a bunch of Chinese? And that's kind of like the equivalent of this, is like these dudes seeing something that's an issue there and being like,
well, I mean, I think that there's a ton of that, because there's like the whole thing where one of the women that they're at a club with is talking about how she wants to go to like Nike Town or something, and it's like she's like describing this thing that's like, I don't know, a place that you can go get shoes in New York, and Frank the American is like, I don't know what that is. And she's like, you've never heard of Nike Town? You're in America and you don't know about this? And so there is this kind of like expectations of what the other culture should know that are kind of based around, you know, like Americans living in America forming ideas of what Japan is, and Japanese people living in Japan deciding what America is. And it's kind of happening in both directions. I did read, I read an interview with Murakami where he talked about, he grew up in a U.S. Army-based town. And so he has for his whole life kind of been thinking about the interesting cultural exchange. He just says, this is from an interview on Vice. So obviously great. But he says, obviously Japan lost the war, and so there's an impression among people here that we were forced into democracy and forced to take on elements of American culture because of that loss. My generation had parts of American influence that we liked and parts that we hated. We also understood the complexities and diversities of American culture better than the previous generation. So, like, he's thinking about this, and then the interviewer says, your novels give the impression that the sudden influx of American and counterculture opened up a kind of vacuum in the traditional Japanese collective mindset. And he says, yeah, that's a pretty good interpretation of what I'm saying.
I think an interesting thing about, like, not like the political relationship or whatever, like the just kind of personal interest relationships of America and Japan are really interesting. Because, like, when you're in Japan, the biggest thing in like streetwear, for example, like, you know, just like any clothing stores off, you go to fucking Shimokitazawa or whatever, like they're all just selling like American college and pro team stuff. Like that's the biggest thing, that like they want to dress like American college students, and that's always been really big. That's kind of written about in this book. And yet, like, I hope I'm not speaking too out of turn, like there is a lot of, and the book tackles this, there is a lot of xenophobia in the country. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not and I understand, I'm a white guy, this is like people of color in America deal with this in a way I can never comprehend. But like, you will notice when people won't sit next to you on a train or whatnot, you know? And like, there is that kind of weird juxtaposition of like, Like, you do really like American culture, but you don't want to sit next to us. And I think the book is tackling that, but also approaching the opposite end of it, which is like American fetishization of Japanese culture, and specifically Japanese women, and infantilization of Japanese women.
Oh yeah,
where, like,
yeah, for sure.
Gross dudes, and this is, I feel like it's something I could speak to more freely. Like, gross dudes just want to go to Asian countries and fuck young women. Like, this is a very common thing. Like, and we're forced to, like, kind of confront those cultures clashing in this book, because, like, Frank just wants to fuck these young women, and, like, the young women are also kind of obsessed with the idea of America as just a place. And I think as America has like as Japan has gotten more popular in recent years, have you noticed that? Like, Japan vloggers are so fucking popular on YouTube now. Like, people just become obsessed with the idea of the country as a concept and not really thinking beyond it. Like, and I think you deal with people like Frank who just want to go over there and take, right? And just kind of use. Like, that's Frank's whole thing. I mean, he just wants to fuck. He cares nothing else about it.
Like, this is, you know, Frank is not a weeb, but, like, you know, this is the kind of, it's fucking Otakon, meaning otaku convention. Like, you know, there has been acknowledgement for a long time of white people being just, like, completely obsessed with Japanese culture and being like, well, I want to go there. I'm sure it's great because all of the anime that I like comes from there. Whatever.
And the flip side of it is someone like Maki talking about, like, fucking Nike Town. Like, yeah. as an American, you'd be like, why the fuck are you wasting your time there? Like, that's stupid. Like, why is that your takeaway of America? Like, this idiot store. I don't even think it exists anymore. I think it closed down. So it's interesting to watch those two ideas clash, and it's fascinating to see it from, like, Murakami's perspective as, like, a Japanese person, like, unpacking kind of that Japanese mindset of being like, we are a city kind of obsessed with America and wanting to take from it, but also repulsed by it because of, like, you know, a lot of prior reasons I can't really understand or unpack, you know?
So speaking of being repulsed by Americans, let's start talking about Frank, who is in some ways the main character of this book.
And, like, really hard to just visually understand. Like, he's kind of like Frankenstein in a way. Like, I really struggled to visualize this man.
I mean, he is like literally like a demon. You know, that's kind of what the book describes him as. So Frank is introduced as he's the most recent guy that Kenji is going to give a sex tour for. He hires him for 3 days, including, like, New Year's Eve. And Kenji's like, I mean, you know, my girlfriend will be mad if I'm out on New Year's Eve, but, like, this is good money, so.
Can I ask you a question? Like, would you feel like you need 3 days of that? I can understand, like, maybe 1 night. I wouldn't feel
like I needed 1 day.
I feel like I would be like, I understand 1 night. You know, it's worth considering. Prostitution is legal there to some extent. So it's not inherently, like, this weird sleazy thing. Well, with Frank it is, but you know what I'm saying. Like, in a perfect world, I feel like I would need 1 day. And then the other 2 days, I'd be like, I guess I'll go see the city, the country, I'll explore.
I mean,
3 days feels like a lot to me.
Frank is for sure a freak. I think there is this level of there are so many places that they can go that
it's
are
true.
Different. So it's like,
true.
I don't think you could have hit all of them in 1 day.
I will say, Kabukicho, probably the most annoying neighborhood on earth. Like, I don't know that I would want to spend 3 hours there. Like, I'm an in and an out man. I'm like, Kenji, what's your hour rate? Because that's all you're getting is 1 hour. I'm done.
So Frank hires Kenji, and immediately he is just like, up until the end of chapter 2, I was like, this is just a story about a guy with bad vibes. You know, that, like, it is just this thing where it's like, he's not really doing anything too terrible, but it's just like, when Kenji looks at Frank, very frequently, he just feels like he's seeing the mask slip and he sees something kind of horrible behind it. It's just kind of like it is described as Kenji is looking at his face and he sees it like curdle in like anger and like almost danger, that you're just seeing like beneath this normal seeming guy, there is something unknowable and dangerous, and then it like goes right back up. But he just keeps seeing that over and over, and then there are other things that happen that we'll get into. But what were you going to ask?
Don't worry about that. It's I mean, the book is obsessed with like the underbelly, right? And it's kind of interesting to see Frank as a character has like this underbelly.
Well, it's almost, but it's like he's almost all underbelly because
sure, but that's like, not his outward persona, right? There is something more beyond the surface.
Yes, that's true. But like one of the things that keeps freaking Kenji out is like he just cannot figure out who Frank, like what his actual deal is, and a lot of that is Frank keeps just telling him different things. He says like, I had 2 sisters, or like I was the oldest brother, or like I love baseball, or I've never played baseball before, and Kenji just keeps kind of getting freaked out because he's like, I'm getting bad vibes from this guy, and I can't counter that with anything that I'm learning about him because that it all just seems made up. It just seems that he's like saying things, and then the craziest thing that he says is he's like, no, here's what happened. Here's Frank explaining why he's giving contradictory information, says, look, I had this thing. Did he have an injury or a surgery?
An injury and a surgery, I believe.
He basically had a brain injury and then a surgery where they were like, they took out a big part of my frontal lobe, but it's regrowing. And so like sometimes I get things wrong because I get confused. But also he says like, I only slept 2 hours last night, but that's fine because I can feel my brain regrowing and it's giving me lots of energy. And it truly is like a Frankenstein level. Like he is a monster.
There's some amount of almost like science fiction or magical realism to this book, especially in the final chapter, that I don't know what to do with. It's very strange. What do you make of like, so we've talked at length now about like the way this book tries to unpack cultural divides and the way Japanese and Americans don't always understand each other, blah blah blah. What do you make of Frank as like an intimate distillation of that, where like Kenji truly can't understand it because the story is always changing?
I mean, like I literally, I'm not really joking when I say that he's a demon, and like especially given how the section that we read ends, but like I think that he is just this like id of kind of anger and violence at Japanese women specifically, and it's this kind of, yeah, I don't really know how to square that with like his Americanness,
what's interesting, and I haven't really thought about it until you said this, but like he is kind of like in anger and id against women and kind of the environment he's now in, but like, in some ways Kenji is that too, just without the violence, right? Like we spend so much of this book with Kenji like kind of casting a lot of hateful judgments among these people, even the ones he's friends with. He makes sure to there's a character, I can't quite remember her name, but she's the juvenile delinquent, right?
Yes.
And like Kenji is ostensibly friends with her, but like he's pretty fucking harsh in his like not in what he says to her,
nice
but like
to anyone.
Yeah. And I think in that way, like Kenji is not a violent character. Kenji does share Frank's like hatred in some ways, and like you know?
It is definitely, it's kind of like, are we just like letting violence happen versus doing, one of the interesting things that it says is that Kenji pretty immediately suspects that Frank was the person who chopped up the high schooler that was found in the trash cans. And one of the things that he says about it is he's like, not a very Japanese way of killing someone. Which is this like weird statement, because it's like, well, why does it matter how you murder someone? But he's like, look, chopping someone up, that's like too extreme for a Japanese person to do. That seems like an American way of killing someone. And so he suspects Frank, who, I mean, I assume, especially after where this ends, we are supposed to, think that that's who did it. But it is like, he separates what is Japanese violence versus American violence, and Frank is this like the most overt, horrible American violence.
It's very funny too, because I'm pretty sure like a year or two before this book came out, there were very famous beheadings in Japan. Like a serial killer who was beheading like children or whatever, and it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that I read that as Kenji being a little ridiculous.
For sure,
like, Kenji, for sure. You don't know what you're talking. What do you mean that, no Japanese person would do this? Here's something.
Your mention of like letting violence happen is really interesting when we talk about the end of chapter 2, where it's like Kenji ostensibly had the ability to stop it, and the book kind of gets into the way everyone's brain shuts down and
everyone
moment.
Just stops. Yeah. Before we get there, there is so we hear a lot about Frank's face being kind of weird and fucked up, and like it's not just Kenji. Other people will also get a glimpse of the mask dropping and be like, oh Jesus. But there is also, oh my god, there is the scene where they're at a peep show, which is a place where you can watch like someone dance through kind of a one-way mirror or something, and then there's like a glory hole that you can stick your dick in, and someone will give you a hand job, and it's talked about like, hey, it's probably not actually the girl dancing, it's probably some like gross old lady or something, because you don't see them. But Kenji, so they go to a peep show, and Kenji knows one of the girls who works there, and he says, hey, listen, I want you to tell me if this guy comes a lot, because if he chopped up that girl, then it meant that he probably had sex a couple days ago, and so maybe he hasn't been able to store up that much cum.
That doesn't make sense, right?
A crazy logical leap. But then what happens is the woman comes back and she's like, look, there wasn't really anything crazy about his cum, but his dick looked evil. She's like, it was the most fucked up dick I've ever seen.
I would kill to see this dick, man. And they talk about like, it's like, no, he doesn't have piercings or anything. It's just his little pocket demon he's got going on.
Have you seen the movie Fargo? Coen Brothers classic?
In high school.
There's a bit in it where everyone they keep asking people to describe like the murderers, and they're like, he was funny looking, and they're like, any particular way, and they're like, no, just funny looking. And I feel like that's what keeps happening with Frank.
yeah. I've been, God, I can't, sorry to say this one out loud, I've been working my way through the very famous Entrails of a Virgin trilogy. Which you would think, Jacob, when I say a title like that, you'd be like, man, these movies must be pretty gnarly. About the most boring bullshit I've ever watched in my life.
That might be worse.
Oh my God. These movies are an hour long and they feel like they're 10 hours. Like they're so long. Like they're so boring. Anyway, definitely in number one, but kind of definitely in number two, but kind of in number one, there is a notable demon dick. Just like a dick that's evil.
There's something that Frank is able to do is he can kind of hypnotize people. And the second time he does it with like a group with a credit card. The first time he does it to Noriko. And do you remember what he does it with? Is it just his
fingers?
His watch?
His fingers.
Oh, just
he
his
says,
fingers.
watch my fingers, one will grow longer.
That's right. Okay, because I feel like the credit card is a pretty overt metaphor, but I don't really know what to make of the watch my fingers thing. But he there are various situations where he's giving off just noxious vibes and the people around him are like getting freaked out. And then he's like, hey, look at this. And he hypnotizes them into a sort of passivity. And then they either do what he wants, like Noriko, or in the second case, he then kills all of them. Because also, if we haven't said it, this chapter 2 ends with Frank killing a club full of people in just the most horrific ways you can imagine.
We skipped over the baseball section, though.
Oh yeah, there are other things, but I was just like, well, we should say that he kills people if people haven't got there. Yeah, okay. So the first day, they kind of go to some clubs. He doesn't seem happy, and then Kenji is like, hey, let's go to some batting cages. Or no, he convinces Kenji to go, right? So they're
that's a real batting cage.
Like the one that they described.
Yeah. It's also in the Yakuza games.
Oh, I was like, I've played the batting minigame in Yakuza.
Yeah. Real gamers know. It's still there, that batting cage.
Yeah, so do you want to describe what happens in this batting cage scene?
Yeah, fucking Frank suckers Kenji into doing a bet to hit a home run. There's like a sign way on the back fence that's like, hit this, you get a home run or whatever. And Kenji can't do it. He tries 20 balls, he can't do it. And then he's like, all right, Frank. And the bet is like, if you lose, I'm not paying for tonight. If you win, I'll double your rate. And he tries to he's like, okay, Frank, you do it then, because Kenji lost. He doesn't want to lose out on his money. So he tries to go double or nothing. And Frank just shuts down completely.
It's like he's standing in the batting cage and he's like standing basically right in front of where the balls are coming. Like Kenji thinks he's just going to get like hit in the face with a ball and he just like freezes. Yeah. And Kenji eventually is like, Frank, come on, get out of here. Like, what are you doing, man?
I mean, it's the realest moment. Granted, it's not like it's a pathetic moment for Frank. Like, it's not a scary moment, but it's the moment in the book, the first moment in the book that most acutely describes that something is very wrong with Frank. Like, everything up to that point is kind of hints, right? Like, yeah, like the flash of the face or the weird skin or how cold he is. But like, that's the moment where it's like, oh, this man is like deeply broken in ways that are confusing, because as like Kenji's watching and as you're reading, like, you really can't even get a grasp on what's happening to Frank.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, it's the first time that we see kind of a weakness from him, like, because usually when bad things are happening, it's like he seems dangerous, and in this it's like, yeah, he shuts down like someone like flipped his power switch. And so it is, he explains it by being like, they took out my frontal lobe, but it is more like, yeah, this dude, he's almost like a robot that powered off. It's very strange. And then he, the next day he's just like, oh yeah, don't worry about that. My brain just got a little weird.
It's so funny that in this book, like, the American doesn't understand why he can't fuck easily, and then the Japanese they make the American, the Japanese don't understand why he's just a Frankenstein. It's like a very weird kind of contrast.
Another scene that I feel like we have to talk about is there's this thing where he's in a club in like the first section, and he's like, hey, no, stay here. We don't have to have sex. Hey, can you help me with my English? And then he has like a sex tour guide magazine.
Oh yeah.
Or he has almost a guidebook, and he's reading just the glossary in the back.
Oh yeah.
And he just keeps saying it, and it's like, my pronunciation is going to be terrible here, but I assume his is as well, where he just says like, Daisuki, love ya. Dame, no. Dankon, penis. Danasan, mister. Dare demo I disu, anyone will do. And he's just like reading this thing. And, Kenji describes the situation as like everyone in the club is like losing it, like laughing harder than they have ever laughed at this American guy just reading this list of sex terms. And Frank does not seem bothered by it, but he also doesn't seem like he's like aware. He's just running through these terms. He's just saying like penis, dick, hello, help, I'll pay. Yeah, and then I mean before we get to that big ending scene, he's obsessed with Kenji's girlfriend. He like asks Kenji to bring her out on the second night, and Kenji's like, no. But also he's like, whenever, like occasionally she'll like call Kenji on his cell phone, and Frank just like grabs the cell phone and he's like, hey, I'm Frank, how you doing? And it's just like he really wants to know her in this way that obviously freaks Kenji out because he thinks that he's, you know, already murdered a high schooler. But it's I do think it's really interesting that up until we get to the end, like he hasn't done anything. And it made me think about do you know about SESTA and FOSTA, Blake, the like internet safety acts?
No.
You will probably be familiar when I start describing them, but this happens, honestly, it happens every like few years now, but it's like an attempt to kind of make the internet safer for children, or, you know, take sex out of it or whatever, that has really negative adverse side effects. And one of the things that I've learned about...
Is this why in some states you can't go to Pornhub anymore?
Well, it's a new thing, but it's a similar act of... Well, I think Pornhub actually did that proactively, being hey, if this happens.
It's like specific states that are like clamping down.
Yeah, so one of the things that I learned that SESTA and FOSTA did is there used to be these sites that sex workers would basically like, you know,
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes.
You know, to basically be like a review / blacklist site.
Right.
To be like, you know, I went out with this person and, you know, he was not cool. He, you know, he stiffed me, or, you know, he assaulted me or something, you know, like any number of things.
There's a Reply All episode.
Oh, that's right. But, you know, and when that went through, when SESTA and FOSTA went through, they took those kind of like big catalogs of kind of sex work customers down, meaning that sex workers no longer had access to these things. And I know people who now like pay to have background checks run on everyone that they might be interacting with in this way. And part of that is because there was this like crowdsourced way to keep people safe, including, I think, this is me making assumptions now, but I think a lot of it was like, this person just has bad vibes, because I think, like, you know, doing sex work is so dangerous because they are so often victims of crime, and you know, police and other people don't care about it, that like a lot of it is just like, you really have to trust your gut, because there are people here who want to do violence to you, and you just need to be able to like figure out how to get yourself out of those situations. And so I was thinking about that a lot with Frank, who is this character who it just seems like everyone basically agrees, like, this is bad news. We don't want to be around him, but no one can like take themselves out of the situation. And eventually it ends with him doing a massacre.
And again, the one person who ostensibly could have stopped it with a can of mace in his pocket, like, notably refuses to do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, even thinks about, like, I want to go and throw the mace away, because, yeah, which is Kenji, to be clear. Kenji brings a can of mace, but then, so, to kind of just describe what happens in this scene, Frank, like, hypnotizes everyone with his credit card. He just says, Kenji, go outside and call your girlfriend. He just tells him to leave, and Kenji does. And then he walks back inside. Frank pulls down the, like, you know, kind of, you know, the closing shutter on the door, whatever it would be, to be like, no one's getting in or out of here. And Kenji looks over and he's like, he describes it as like giving a woman a second mouth, just like slit her throat completely and stabbed someone else in the back. And then while Kenji is just kind of standing there, he, stabs another person. He almost beheads a woman, just in terms of like how severely he's slashing her throat. And he like burns a guy's face with a lighter, like melts the skin on his face before snapping his neck. And then eventually tells Kenji to rape one of the women who he's just killed, and Kenji refuses. And then, God, and I feel disgusting even saying this, but it does feel important in some way. He cuts one of the men he's killed's ear off and puts his ear in the dead woman's vagina, which I don't even know what to make of it, but is a thing that happens, and it is memorable. And yeah, during this whole scene, Kenji is just kind of standing there, paralyzed, and thinking through why is he paralyzed and what is happening to everyone.
If I was there, it would have been different, man.
Yeah.
Me and Mark Wahlberg, we would have fucking handled it.
Go ahead.
It's the most horrific thing I've ever read. I remember, like, the first time I read this book being, like, genuinely terrified of this whole thing.
It is literally nauseating in that, like, I felt like bile in my throat. It is, I think it's interesting that you and the book, describe it as this kind of, like, Japanese passivity, of, like, everyone just kind of, like, freezing. Because I do think, like, I think this scene could have been in a Stephen King book set in Maine, and, like, if everyone acted the same way, I wouldn't think, oh, that seems culturally weird. Like, I think that there is some level of just the swiftness and, like, callousness of which these horrible acts are happening just kind of paralyzes everyone. And if I was there, I think it would have been the same, where it's like, I don't think I would have been able to do anything. And I think this idea of everyone just finding themselves in a nightmare, and Kenji even says at the end of the scene, he's like, I felt like I was going to open my eyes and things would be normal because this just felt so nightmarish. But then I opened my eyes and it all had happened. Like that, everyone freezing did feel very real to me. Here's an interesting part of it. Kenji looks at the knife that that Frank is stabbing people with, and remarks that it's longer than his penis, like longer than Kenji's penis, which is, if you needed any more literal conflation of, like, sex and violence,
yeah,
here you go.
Yeah. Did you know the book was careening towards this?
I mean, you had described it as so rotten, and nothing truly awful had happened yet, and so I thought there would be something, but it's a credit to his writing style that, like, he writes it so matter-of-factly that, like, the first thing that you read where he comes back in and he's just looking at, like, two people who have just been killed, it almost, like, takes you a second to realize what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think Murakami is a writer, and this is kind of like divorcing the violence from its message for a second. It's like, and this is especially true. I mean, his most famous example of violence is in Audition. If you've read that book or seen that movie, you know what happens in that. Like, he always knows how to deploy violence at the perfect moment to make it impactful, right? Like it feels like that comes at such a good moment in that book for it to be like, all right, it is now time to like have the breakdown of
yeah, but it feels, it's like we have another day left. You know, like this does feel like the finale, and part of the like horror is like looking at the book and being like, wait, he still does day 3 after this happens? So yeah, it's like, I think it is, yeah, plot-wise, it works really well because I was not expecting the most horrible thing in the world to happen here. You know, like, I thought, oh, maybe he catches Frank killing one person, but like not this level of violence just on display for everyone to see.
It's deployed perfectly. That third day is a trip, man. What do you think? Overall thoughts on all of this? How's your journey through in the Miso Soup?
I mean, it feels bizarre after that to say I'm really enjoying it, but like it's a very readable book. I think it's like, it is often funny. It's written, you know, very simply in that it doesn't take, you know, you don't feel yourself getting tired while reading it. I'm really into it, and it is, the end of our section is so crazy that I cannot even begin to guess what is going to happen in the next section of it. But like, I would read more Murakami books.
Yes, sir. You're definitely going to watch a few Murakami movies.
Am I? This scene does not make me super amped to watch movies.
I will say this is the most, in the books I've read of his, this is the most violent scene he's ever done. Like, by a long shot. Like, Love and Pop has no, like, dismemberment scenes.
Okay.
You know, like, it's Audition does. But that's
but I do think, you know, if we want to compare him to an American author of the kind of seedy and grotesque, I'm getting a lot more mileage out of this than, like, a Chuck Palahniuk. And maybe it is because I'm kind of giving him the benefit of the doubt for writing about like cultural differences that I'm not totally familiar with, whereas I just think that Palahniuk's writing is like dumb sometimes. But like I think it's interesting that the book it does not seem to be about like the spectacle of violence, even though there is this one unbelievably horrible scene.
Well, that's the difference between him and Chuck, right? Like, Chuck has to gross you out as much as possible, and whereas Murakami is waiting for the correct moment to deploy his violence. Like, why does that character wipe boogers on his wall in that Chuck Palahniuk book? Remember that one? Rant, I think it was. He's got the booger wall.
They all do that. I mean, Asmongold has the teeth blood wall, and he's a real guy.
This is not a real person.
Don't
besmirch the good name of the human race by considering Asmongold part of that. You fucking bitch. Asmongold.
Yeah. So, anyway, thanks everyone for listening to our first book, Something Rotten. I hope you weren't around people who would judge you for what you were listening for that last description of what happens at the end of this book.
There's not that many. There's not that many like rotten books, right? You know.
Yeah, definitely not. Not like thousands and thousands.
What do you think? We read the Marquis de Sade next.
I don't know what that is.
Didn't you do a fucking video on like the Theater of Pain or whatever? Theater of Cruelty?
Yeah, that's not Marquis de Sade. That's
it's kind of all in the same boat.
Look, Blake, when I talk about things, those Brecht that I was talking about. I know exactly as much as it's in the video and no more. Okay, that's how I get these things done. I get folks, really good at the thing I'm saying and nothing else.
Right into somethingrottenpodcast at podcast@gmail.com if you want me to make Jacob read the Marquis de Sade. And we will. I love this book. I love Murakami. I think this is probably his best book I've read. Though, not the best piece of Murakami media, because his movie he directed is the best thing he's ever done. But I'm stoked you're reading it. I think it's a cool fucking book.
So a reminder, next time we will be finishing this book, and then after that we will be starting a book called The Har, Haar, by David Sodergren, which neither Blake nor I have read, so I hope it's good.
I don't like the name.
It's not a great name,
The
but
Har.
you know.
The Har. I don't like saying that. David, come on the show. Let's talk about it.
All right. And until next time, Blake, is there anything we want to say before we finish this up?
Nah.
Oh. Thanks for listening to Something Rotten. For Blake Hester, my name's Jacob Geller, and that guy's dick was not normal. It was weird.
That's kind of what mine looks like.